Poor girl missed exam to save the Mafia boss's sister. Next day, a Rolls-Royce arrived at her door. The evening sky was painted in shades of crimson and purple, the last rays of sun slipping behind the tall, silent buildings. Her heart raced, not from running, but from the weight of the choice she had just made. Tonight, she had decided to risk everything for a stranger. The city around her seemed alive with whispers. Neon signs flickered like faint stars, and the smell of rain-soaked asphalt mingled with the scent of cooking food from nearby windows. Ilara's home was nothing more than a small apartment above a dusty grocery store, but tonight she didn't think of her own safety. She thought only of Seraphine. It had happened just hours ago. Ilara had been sitting in her classroom, the exam papers spread before her, every word screaming at her, "Pass me, fail me." But she couldn't focus. Her mind was elsewhere where a scream had pierced the night. She had not known the girl personally, yet instinct had led her through the alleyways until she had found Seraphine, trembling and cornered by a group of men whose faces carried the coldness of danger itself. Ilara hadn't hesitated. She had thrown herself between the girl and her attackers, shouting, flailing, doing anything to give Seraphine a chance to escape. Fear had clutched her heart, but she had pushed it aside. In that moment, every thought of exams, grades, and future faded. All that remained was the need to protect. After the struggle, after running through the shadowed streets hand in hand, they had hidden in an abandoned warehouse. There, Seraphine's pale face had twisted in fear and gratitude, her hands shaking as she clutched Ilara's arm. Why did you save me?" she whispered, her voice fragile, almost like a prayer. Ilara had only shrugged. "I couldn't just leave you there," she said simply. And though the words were plain, the truth behind them carried more weight than any essay she had ever written. She had never imagined her life could hold such a moment, such significance. But the world was not done testing her courage. As dawn approached, the city felt eerily quiet, as if it were holding its breath. And then, as she returned home, exhausted and soaked from the rain that had begun to fall, a sound stopped her heart. A low, commanding growl, mechanical yet alive, rolled down the street. She turned, and her eyes fell on a black Rolls-Royce parked outside her tiny building. Its polished body reflected the dim light of the street lamps, making it seem almost supernatural. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His movements were smooth, practiced, and his presence alone seemed to push the air into sharp lines. His dark eyes scanned the street, resting finally on Ilara. The chill that ran down her spine had nothing to do with the cold rain. "Ilara," the man said, his voice low, almost hypnotic, "Kale requests your presence." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Kale. The name had reached her ears only in whispers before. The Mafia boss, a man whose power was spoken of in fear and awe throughout the city. To be summoned by him was not merely unusual, it was dangerous. Yet curiosity and something deeper, something she did not yet understand, pulled her forward. She nodded, words lost on her lips, and climbed into the car. The interior smelled faintly of leather and smoke, and the faint hum of the engine vibrated through her bones. Outside, the city seemed to blur, the buildings stretching and twisting like painted shadows. As they drove, Ilara's thoughts raced. Why would Kale care about her? She was just a student, a girl who had done one brave thing. But in the world of men like Kale, bravery was currency. And perhaps, she thought, it was also dangerous. The mansion appeared suddenly, as if the city itself had opened its gates to reveal it. It was enormous, Gothic, with towers that reached like fingers into the sky. Windows glowed with a warm, golden light, but the shadows beneath the arches hinted at secrets that had waited decades to be revealed. Ilara stepped out, her knees trembling. The driver nodded and waited, silent as a shadow. The door swung open, and there he stood. Kale. The stories did not exaggerate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black that seemed woven from the night itself. His hair was dark, eyes darker, and yet There was something almost tragic in the set of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. He looked at her not with suspicion but with interest, an intensity that made her feel naked in the rain. "You saved my sister," he said, voice calm but edged with power. "Few have the courage to do that." Alara swallowed hard. I didn't think," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the rain that drummed on the marble floors of the mansion's entry hall. Kale's lips curved in something like a smile. "Few think when they act. That is why they survive." He gestured for her to follow. She walked behind him through hallways adorned with ancient paintings and towering statues, feeling like she had entered another world, a world where time obeyed different rules, where danger and beauty were intertwined. Seraphine appeared then, stepping out from a corridor draped in shadow. Her eyes were wide and relief shone in her expression as she saw Alara. She ran forward, grasping Alara's hands in both of hers. "You came," she whispered. "You really came." Alara nodded, unsure if it was the warmth of the mansion or the tension in the air, but her hand felt small in Seraphine's grasp. Kale watched silently, leaning against the arch of the doorway, his presence commanding the space as easily as a king commanding a throne. "I hope you understand," Kale said, breaking the brief silence, "that saving her put you in a world you do not yet know, a world of debts, of enemies, of promises that cannot be broken. You are now tied to my family's fate." Alara felt a cold weight settle in her chest. "I just wanted to help," she whispered. "And you did," Kale said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That is why you are here. Courage and recklessness are often the same, but you have something more." The air shifted, heavy with meaning. Alara did not know what that something more was, but she sensed it was powerful, dangerous, and perhaps, for the first time, significant. Kale led them to a sitting room, the walls lined with books and artifacts that hinted at old, almost forgotten power. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the shadows danced like living creatures. Seraphine sat on the edge of a sofa, still clutching Alara's hands, while Kale remained standing, his figure a dark silhouette against the firelight. "Tomorrow," Kale said finally, "you will need to decide. Will you stay and learn what it means to walk in this world? Or will you return to your life as simple as it was?" Alara's mind raced. She had missed her exam, jeopardized her future, and now she was here in the presence of a man whose reputation filled the city with fear. Yet beneath that fear she felt something else, a spark faint but persistent. She did not answer. The truth was, she did not know. She only knew that leaving felt impossible. Something in the way Kale looked at her, something in the way the firelight reflected in Seraphine's eyes, made her feel that her life had already changed forever. Night fell deeper, and the mansion seemed to close around them, protective yet watchful. Alara found herself wandering to a window, staring at the city below. It stretched endlessly, lights like scattered stars, streets twisting like veins. Somewhere down there, her old life waited. Somewhere, the exam papers she had missed, the world she had left behind, whispered promises of normalcy. But here, above it all, danger and beauty were entwined, and she could feel the pulse of something extraordinary beginning to stir. A knock on the door startled her. Kale's voice followed almost immediately. "Rest now. Tomorrow will demand everything you have, and perhaps more than you know you can give." Alara sat on the edge of the bed, the firelight casting flickering shadows across the walls. Her thoughts swirled. Fear, excitement, uncertainty, all tangled together. She had done the right thing, she had saved a life, but at what cost? And what awaited her in this strange, gilded world of power and secrets? Outside, the city slept, unaware of the small girl who had risked everything, unaware that her life was now forever entangled with a man whose presence could change the course of her destiny. And within the quiet, Alara felt it, the first tremor of something deep and unstoppable. Courage, curiosity, and an unspoken connection that would draw her into a world she could never have imagined. Tomorrow, she would meet Kale again. Tomorrow, she would step further into this shadowed world. And tomorrow, The path she chose would begin to shape not only her fate, but the fate of those around her. But for now, she only sat, staring at the fire, listening to the rain, and feeling that the world she had known was gone forever. And in the deepest part of her heart, she wondered, what had she truly saved that night? And what had she truly begun? The sun had barely risen over the city, spilling pale light over the rooftops, when Alara awoke in a room that felt both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. The curtains were heavy, dark velvet, and the soft hum of the mansion's air, and the distant clatter of servants moving through the halls reminded her she was no longer in her small apartment above the grocery store. Her thoughts drifted instantly to the events of the previous night, the alley, the rain, the moment she had saved Seraphine, and then, inevitably, to the black Rolls-Royce and the man who had commanded her attention like no one else ever had, Kale. His presence haunted her thoughts, not with fear alone, but with a strange mixture of curiosity, awe, and something she could not name. She dressed quickly in the simple clothes she had brought with her, feeling the weight of the decision that lay ahead. Today, Kale had promised, she would learn more about the world she had entered, a world of power, loyalty, and shadows. As she stepped into the hallway, Seraphine was already waiting. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her eyes wide and bright, still carrying the traces of fear and relief from the night before. "You're awake," she said softly, her voice a gentle thread in the quiet morning. "I wasn't sure you would be." Alara gave a small smile. "I didn't sleep much," she admitted. "There's a lot to think about." Seraphine nodded, glancing toward the staircase. "He's waiting. Kale wants to speak with you soon." The very mention of Kale sent a shiver down Alara's spine. She followed Seraphine through the ornate corridors, the air thick with the scent of old wood, polished stone, and faint traces of something unfamiliar, something almost like the air of a place untouched by the ordinary world. The mansion was enormous, each hallway and archway larger than rooms she had ever known, and each step seemed to echo not only in the house but within her own thoughts. Kale met them in a large sitting room, the walls lined with books, maps, and artifacts that seemed ancient and yet purposeful. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced like living shapes across the room. He stood near the window, tall and unyielding, his black clothes absorbing the dim light, his expression unreadable but his eyes fixed on Alara with unmistakable intensity. "Good morning," he said, voice calm yet commanding, as if the world itself paused to listen. "I hope you rested," Alara swallowed, nodding. I did." Kale's gaze did not waver. "You have courage," he said, the words deliberate, measured. "Few possess it. Courage is a dangerous gift, for it can bring salvation or destruction." Alara felt a cold tension coil in her stomach. She had already seen glimpses of his power, of the influence he held over the city, over people's fates, and yet hearing him speak of danger in such controlled tones made her realize that Kale lived entirely in a world she had never touched. He gestured toward a large table covered with maps and documents. "You saved my sister last night. That act was brave, yes, but it has consequences. You cannot simply return to the life you left behind. There are chains in this world, unseen but binding. Every choice carries weight, every action has cost." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had not expected gratitude to come with such gravity. I didn't think about consequences," she admitted. I knew I couldn't leave her there." Kale's lips curved slightly, almost a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "That is why you are here, and that is why I must offer you a choice. You may remain, learn what it means to walk in my world, or you may leave and return to your life of simplicity. But know this, once you choose, there is no turning back." The weight of his words pressed down on her. She thought of her home, of her small, quiet life, of the missed exam and the friends who would be waiting for her tomorrow. And then she thought of Seraphine, of the fear she had seen in her eyes, and the relief she had felt when Alara had saved her. Somehow her heart told her that leaving would be impossible. I want to stay, she said finally, her voice trembling but firm. I want to learn. Kale nodded once sharply, and the room seemed to settle around her, as if acknowledging the decision. Very well, he said. Then your journey begins today. Over the next hours, Kale led Alara through parts of the mansion she had not yet seen. Libraries that smelled of dust and leather, rooms filled with strange artifacts whose origin she could not guess, and corridors that twisted like a labyrinth. Everywhere there was evidence of Kale's reach, maps of the city marked with precise notes, letters from unknown hands, even strange, delicate charms that seemed to hum faintly with a power she could feel in her chest. As they walked, Kale spoke of loyalty, of power, and of responsibility. His words were not easy to follow, but they carried a rhythm, a poetic cadence that made her mind sharpen even as it filled her with wonder. He spoke of enemies and allies, of debts owed and debts collected, and of a world hidden beneath the ordinary one she had known, a world that required both courage and careful thought. Seraphine trailed behind them, her gaze shifting constantly between the two of them. There was gratitude in her eyes, certainly, but also a quiet fear, fear that Alara might be drawn too deeply into the world she had only begun to glimpse. Yet, despite that fear, there was a hint of admiration, as if Seraphine recognized in Alara something rare and precious. By midday, they reached a sunlit terrace overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, the streets below a tangle of life, motion, and shadows. Kale leaned on the balustrade, watching the city as if reading its secrets, while Alara and Seraphine stood side by side, staring at the world beneath them. You will not be untested here, Kale said finally, turning his gaze to her. The path ahead is filled with choices that will test your courage, your loyalty, and your heart. You must decide not only what you are willing to do, but who you are willing to become. Alara nodded, though she did not fully understand. The truth was, she had already begun to change. Saving Seraphine had awakened something in her, a strength she had not known she possessed, a curiosity and courage that demanded she follow this strange, dangerous path. That evening, as the mansion grew quiet and the firelight flickered against the walls, Kale left her to her thoughts. Seraphine stayed by her side, and the two of them spoke in whispers, sharing fears, hopes, and quiet laughter that felt fragile yet precious in the vast, imposing mansion. I was so scared, Seraphine admitted finally. I thought I would never see the morning. But you saved me. Alara shook her head. I didn't do it for thanks. I don't know why I did it. I couldn't leave you there. Seraphine smiled softly, and for a moment the room seemed warmer, less filled with the weight of Kale's world. Yet outside, shadows moved through the mansion, silent and patient, as if aware of every choice, every moment, every breath. That night sleep came reluctantly. Alara lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of the mansion, the soft steps of servants, the occasional murmur of voices she could not place, and the quiet hum of the city beyond. She felt a tension in her chest, a mix of fear and anticipation. Tomorrow she would face Kale again, and whatever lessons or tests he had planned would not be easy. And then, as she stared at the ceiling, she realized something that made her heart race. She did not simply want to survive in this world. She wanted to understand it. She wanted to understand him. Kale. The name lingered in her mind, a shadow and a spark all at once. There was danger in him, certainly, but also something she could not resist, a pull, a weight, a promise of something vast and unknown. And despite the caution she tried to hold on to, she felt the first stirrings of trust, of connection, and perhaps even of something deeper. Morning came again, pale and soft. Alara dressed carefully, her hands trembling slightly, and met Kale in the same sitting room where their conversations had begun. Today he was serious, almost unreadable, and yet the tension between them was undeniable. You have chosen to stay, he said, voice even, controlled. That is the first step, But steps alone are not enough. You must understand the cost of your choices. He handed her a small, leather-bound book. Its pages were filled with notes, maps, and instructions, all written in a careful, precise hand. Learn, observe, and remember, the world you see is only a part of the whole. There are layers, shadows beneath shadows. Those who ignore them do not last long. Alara nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the book. She understood, even if only partly, that her life had irrevocably changed. The simple world she had known was gone. She was now part of a larger story, one filled with danger, power, and connection she could not yet comprehend. Kale's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "Do not disappoint me," he said softly, almost a whisper. Alara's chest tightened. She did not fully understand him, and perhaps she never would. But she felt the weight of his words and the power of the world she had entered. And deep inside, she knew one truth: she could not turn back. The mansion, the city, Kale, and Seraphine, they were all threads in a web she was now part of. And somewhere in that web, her courage, her heart, and her choices would shape not only her fate but the fate of those around her. And as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the terrace and into the city below, Alara realized that this was only the beginning. Somewhere, deep in the streets and alleys of the city, danger waited. And yet, for the first time, she felt ready to meet it. The mansion had settled into a heavy, expectant quiet. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls, and the city beyond hummed with life, unaware of the small world of power, danger, and choice that thrived above it. Alara stood on the balcony, her fingers tracing the cool stone of the railing. She looked down at the streets, watching as the city's early morning bustle began. Carriages rolling along wet cobblestones, street vendors arranging their goods, people hurrying to work or school. The ordinary world seemed so far away now, almost like another life she had left behind. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Kale's voice came from behind her. She startled slightly and turned to see him standing in the shadows, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon. "But beauty often masks danger. You must remember that." Alara nodded, unsure what to say. She had learned this already. The mansion, the city, even the air she breathed now carried hidden meaning. Every smile, every word, every gesture might conceal a threat or a test. And Kale, he was both fascinating and terrifying, a force she could not ignore even if she tried. "I know," she said finally. "I understand there's more than what I see." Kale's gaze softened for a moment, almost imperceptibly. "Understanding is the first step," he said. "But it is not enough. You will be tested. And sometimes tests do not come in the form you expect. Courage alone may not save you. Wisdom, patience, and restraint are equally important." Before she could respond, the sharp sound of a bell rang through the mansion, breaking the calm. A servant hurried past, whispering something to Kale. The dark man's expression changed subtly, his calm mask slipping for just a heartbeat. "They are here," he said quietly, more to himself than to Alara. Then his gaze shifted back to her. "It seems your first trial begins today." Alara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. A trial. She had expected lessons, perhaps tasks, but not this. The implication of danger lurking so close was almost tangible. And yet, despite her fear, her heart thrummed with a strange excitement. She had been drawn into this world for a reason, and now she would learn exactly what that reason might be. Kale led her through twisting hallways and up a spiral staircase that seemed to climb endlessly, until they reached a private study high in the mansion. The room smelled faintly of old parchment and ink. Maps were spread across the desk, and charts marked with symbols she could not decipher covered the walls. "You must learn to see beyond appearances," Kale said, stepping aside to allow her a closer look at the maps. "The city is alive. Every alley, every street, every shadow hides movement. There are those who wish to see my family destroyed, and soon you may find yourself in the middle of their schemes." Alara frowned, tracing the lines on the maps with her fingers. "I don't understand." Why me? Why am I involved in this? Kale's eyes met hers, intense and unwavering. Because you acted without fear when others would have hesitated. That choice marked you. Courage does not exist alone, it invites consequence. You cannot ignore what you have set in motion. Seraphine appeared quietly in the doorway, her expression a mix of worry and admiration. "Ilara," she whispered, "I don't know what they'll do, but I trust you. Please be careful." Ilara gave a small, reassuring smile, though her heart was heavy. She did not yet understand the full scale of the danger, but she knew one truth: she could not fail. Not now, not when so many lives were intertwined with her choices. Hours passed as Kale explained the structure of his world, the rival factions, the delicate balance of power, and the supernatural rumors that surrounded him. He spoke of debts owed and debts collected, of families torn apart, of ancient promises written in blood and silence. Ilara listened, absorbing every word, feeling her mind expand with understanding, and yet tighten with the weight of responsibility. As night fell, Kale led her to the terrace once more. The city was bathed in silver light from the moon, and the streets below shimmered with life and motion. It was breathtaking and terrifying. "You will encounter darkness," Kale said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not all of it comes from others. Some of it comes from within. Fear, doubt, anger, they are all chains that bind the soul. You must recognize them and overcome them, or they will consume you." Ilara's fingers clenched the railing. I don't know if I'm strong enough." Kale stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Strength is not measured in power alone. It is measured in choice, in restraint, in knowing when to act and when to wait. You have the courage, Ilara. Now you must learn to temper it with wisdom." That night she barely slept. Her dreams were restless, filled with shadows and whispers, with visions of the city in flames, of people she could not yet name, and of Kale, always Kale, watching, waiting, testing her in ways she could not understand. When dawn broke, the mansion was alive with movement. Servants bustled through the halls, preparing for the day, and Kale appeared in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "It is time," he said simply. "Today you will face the first true measure of your courage." Ilara followed him through hidden passageways to a part of the city she had never seen. Narrow alleys twisted between old buildings, shadows pooling like dark water. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and strangely alive. Kale stopped before a small, nondescript building. "Inside," he said, "you will find what you need to understand." She entered cautiously. The room was dimly lit, filled with old books, jars of strange substances, and maps covered with notes in handwriting she could not read. And then she saw them, figures crouched in the shadows, waiting, watching. "You must confront your fear," Kale said behind her. "Not with violence, but with presence, with courage. Show them that you are not afraid." Ilara took a deep breath, her heart hammering. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear that surged within her. "I am not afraid," she said, though it sounded smaller than she wished. The figures stirred, moving closer. Yet, as she stood her ground, something remarkable happened. They hesitated, then retreated, melting back into the shadows. Kale's eyes met hers, a flicker of approval hidden behind his usual calm. "You see," he said once they were alone, "courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite it. Remember that." Ilara nodded, feeling a rush of exhilaration and relief. She had survived the first test, but the knowledge that greater challenges awaited made her chest tighten with anticipation and dread. That evening, as she returned to the mansion, Seraphine was waiting. Her eyes were bright with questions. "What happened?" she asked. Ilara smiled faintly. "I learned something today," she said. "Courage isn't about fighting. It's about standing even when you are afraid. And I think I'm ready for more." Seraphine reached out and took her hand. "I trust you," she said simply. And in that moment, Ilara felt a bond stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. But danger was never far. That night, as the mansion slept, a shadow moved at the edge of the city, watching, waiting, planning. Rival factions whispered in the streets, plotting, and somewhere a force older than the city itself stirred, sensing the courage and change that Alara represented. Kale, as always, was aware. He stood on the terrace, his gaze fixed on the horizon, and for the first time allowed a glimpse of the weight he carried. Not only the power of the city, but the burden of those he cared for, and those who dared to step into his world. Alara in her room felt a strange pull in her chest, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something deeper. She did not fully understand it, but she knew that her connection to Kale and Seraphine was changing her. She was no longer just a girl from a small apartment. She was part of something larger, a story of power, choice, and courage that was only beginning to unfold. As the moon rose high, casting silver light across the city, Alara realized that she was ready for the challenges ahead. She had faced fear and uncertainty, and she had survived. But she also knew that survival alone was not enough. To truly walk in Kale's world, she would need to embrace courage, wisdom, and the unspoken pull of destiny that drew her closer to both danger and something she could not yet name. And deep in the streets below, the first whispers of an attack began to stir, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test not only her courage but the bonds she had begun to form. Alara stood by the window, watching the city, and for the first time she felt the thrilling weight of her own power and the undeniable pull of the world she had chosen to enter. Tomorrow, she knew, would change everything. The city slept beneath a silver moon, but the mansion was alive with tension. Alara stood on the terrace, the cool night air brushing against her face, and watched the streets below. The city she had once walked as an ordinary girl now seemed like a labyrinth of secrets, danger, and possibility. Each shadow, each flicker of light carried meaning, and she knew that the trials she had faced were only the beginning. Kale appeared silently beside her, his presence as commanding as the night itself. "They are moving," he said, his voice calm yet edged with power. "The rival faction has learned of your courage. They underestimate you, but they do not underestimate me. Tonight you will see the consequences of bravery and the weight of loyalty." Alara's fingers tightened around the railing. She had faced fear before, but tonight would be different. Tonight, the stakes were no longer abstract lessons or small tests. Tonight, people's lives depended on her choices. Seraphine appeared then, her expression a mixture of concern and trust. "Be careful," she whispered. "I believe in you, Alara. I trust you with my life." Alara swallowed the lump in her throat. "I will not fail you," she said firmly. She had learned courage, yes, but she had also learned that courage alone was not enough. She had learned patience, observation, and the quiet power of choosing when and how to act. Kale led them through the mansion's secret corridors, passages hidden from ordinary eyes, twisting through walls like veins beneath the city. Each step was silent, purposeful, and Alara felt the weight of the night pressing down on her. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew what was coming and waited in anticipation. They emerged into the city through a hidden doorway, the streets illuminated by pale lantern light. Shadows moved in the alleys, but Alara noticed them first. The rival faction, silent and calculated, gathering in the dark corners. Her heart raced, but her training, her awareness, and the lessons Kale had taught her steadied her resolve. "You must lead," Kale said quietly, his hand brushing hers in a brief, grounding touch. "Not blindly, but with thought. Trust your instincts. Protect her." He nodded toward Seraphine, who was close by, her hands trembling slightly but her eyes filled with confidence in Alara. The first movement came from the far end of the alley, figures emerging silently. Alara's breath caught, but she held her ground, standing between the approaching threat and Seraphine. Her voice was calm, firm, and carried the authority she had discovered in herself over the past days. "I will not allow harm," she said. "Leave or face the consequences." The figures paused, sizing her up. There was no violence in her stance, only determination, courage, and an unspoken strength that drew on something deeper than fear. Kale stepped beside her, silent and formidable, his presence magnifying hers. For a tense moment, the city seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, the rival faction retreated, melting into the shadows, their plans disrupted by a display of courage and unity they had not expected. Alara exhaled, the adrenaline leaving her limbs trembling but her mind sharp. She had faced the first true test of her bravery and emerged not only unscathed but stronger, her connection to both Kale and Seraphine deepened by shared courage. Kale's eyes met hers, dark and inscrutable. "You are stronger than you realize," he said softly. "Not because you are fearless, but because you choose to act despite fear. That is the mark of someone who can change the course of more than just her own life." Seraphine stepped forward, her expression relieved and awed. "Ilara, you were incredible," she said. "I don't know how you did it, but you saved us." Ilara shook her head, feeling the weight of the night settle over her. "We did it together," she said. "I couldn't have done this alone." Kale nodded, a faint hint of approval in his usually calm demeanor. "That is true," he said. "Courage is necessary, but loyalty and trust shape the path of those who survive. You have learned that now, and this is only the beginning." As they returned to the mansion, the first rays of dawn began to light the sky. The city below glimmered with new life, unaware of the trials that had unfolded above it. Ilara felt a sense of accomplishment, yes, but also a profound transformation. She was no longer the timid student who had once worried about exams. She was a part of something larger, a force capable of influencing the tides of power, loyalty, and destiny. Inside the mansion, Kale led them to the sitting room, the fire casting warm light across the walls. He gestured for Ilara to sit. "You have faced the darkness tonight," he said, "but there is more to understand. True strength is not only in courage or skill, but in the ability to forgive, to protect, and to guide others. You will learn that in time." Ilara looked at him, her mind racing. I want to understand," she said. "I want to help, to protect, to learn everything I can." Kale studied her, his expression unreadable, and then nodded. "Then you will continue," he said. "But remember, the path you walk is not without cost. There will be moments of doubt, of fear, and of temptation. How you face them will define not only your destiny but the lives of those you hold dear." Seraphine reached out, taking Ilara's hand. "We'll face it together," she said. "Whatever comes, we're not alone." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest at those words. She realized that she had found more than courage tonight. She had found loyalty, trust, and a bond that would guide her through the trials ahead. The days that followed were filled with lessons, training, and observation. Kale taught her to read the city like a map, to sense danger in subtle movements, and to recognize the intentions of those who moved in the shadows. Ilara absorbed everything with a determination that surprised even herself. Each lesson brought her closer to understanding Kale's world and her place within it. Yet, with understanding came the awareness of her own limitations. She was learning that power was not always measured in strength or influence, but in choices, restraint, and the courage to act for the greater good. Kale watched her closely, often silent, yet present, his presence a constant reminder of both danger and potential. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Kale brought Ilara to the terrace once more. The city below was bathed in golden light, the streets alive with movement and possibility. "You have grown," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Not just in courage, but in understanding. You have faced fear, acted with wisdom, and protected those who needed you. That is the true measure of strength." Ilara looked at him, her heart beating with a mixture of pride and awe. "Thank you," she said simply. I could not have done it without you guiding me." Kale's gaze softened slightly, a rare vulnerability in his usually unreadable expression. "Guidance can only take you so far," he said. "The rest comes from within, and you have found that strength. Remember it, trust it." Seraphine appeared beside them, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "Alara," she said, her voice gentle, "you've changed everything, not just for yourself but for all of us. You've shown what it means to be brave, to care, and to fight for what's right." Alara felt tears prick her eyes, though she did not allow them to fall. She had indeed changed. She was no longer the ordinary girl who had once worried about exams. She was part of a story much larger, a story of courage, loyalty, and transformation. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder, firm yet reassuring. "You have learned the first truth of this world," he said. "That courage, loyalty, and heart are more powerful than fear or force. But there is one more lesson, one that comes from choice and forgiveness. You must learn to forgive yourself for mistakes and embrace the responsibility of your power." Alara nodded, understanding at last. She had made choices that had altered lives, had faced danger and fear, and had learned to act despite uncertainty. And yet she had done it with honesty, compassion, and integrity. That, she realized, was the true mark of strength. The following weeks were filled with challenges, small and large. Rival factions tested the mansion's security, mysterious messages arrived in the night, and the city's undercurrent of danger never fully disappeared. But through each trial, Alara, Kale, and Seraphine stood together, their bond deepening, their understanding of one another growing. One night, as the mansion slept, Alara walked to the terrace alone. The city stretched below her, glittering like a sea of stars, and she felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had faced fear, discovered courage, and embraced her place in a world far larger and more complex than she had ever imagined. Kale joined her silently, standing beside her without speaking. They watched the city together, a quiet understanding passing between them. No words were needed. Trust, loyalty, and the bonds of shared trials spoke louder than any conversation. Seraphine appeared behind them, her presence gentle and reassuring. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we face it together, always." Alara felt the full weight and beauty of that promise. She was no longer alone, no longer uncertain, no longer just a girl from a small apartment. She was a force in her own right, a protector, a friend, and a part of a world where courage, choice, and heart determined the path forward. And somewhere deep in the city, in the alleys and shadowed corners, danger still waited. But Alara no longer feared it. She had been tested, transformed, and strengthened. She was ready for whatever came next. As dawn broke, spilling gold across the city, Alara, Kale, and Seraphine stood together on the terrace. The firelight of the mansion behind them, the city alive before them, they understood something profound. The trials they had faced had changed them, but the bonds they had forged, the courage they had discovered, and the choices they had made would guide them through every shadow, every challenge, every moment yet to come. And for the first time, Alara felt a sense of true belonging, a sense of power and purpose, and the quiet, unshakable certainty that she had found not only courage but redemption, and that the story she had begun was only the first chapter of a life that would be extraordinary in every way.